Go back there and change names. Okay, 2 Corinthians chapter 9. We'll start at verse 6 and verse 7, and we covered part of this last week. These two verses began to deal with the idea of how or what God expects of His children as far as being good givers. Paul discusses givers that please God. Let's read verse 6 and 7. Paul says, or states, "But this I say, he which soweth sparingly shall reap also sparingly, and he which soweth bountifully shall reap also bountifully. Every man according as he purposeth in his heart, so let him give, not grudgingly or of necessity, for God loveth a cheerful giver." And so the concept of sowing and reaping is laid out in these verses. If you sow a little, you get a little, or you reap a little. You sow a lot, you reap a great deal or a lot. So I guess if we think about this in the physical realm, it's very true. The harder you work, honestly, the better off we are, and that's typical. I know there's no 100% rule in the physical realm, but it typically is that way. But spiritually, it is very true and very consistent. If we are stingy people, spiritually speaking, then we're not going to have much reward. So I think it pays us to think and to remember verses like we read last week, and I'll read the one that I mentioned, Proverbs 11 and verse 24. There is that scattereth and yet increasing, and there is that withholdeth more than is meet, but it tendeth to poverty. And so the concept is, when you have and you spread and you give to others, or you give in a liberal fashion, then God is going to bless you. Proverbs 22 and verse 9, "He that hath a bountiful eye shall be blessed." The concept there is given, and it's a theme that runs throughout the entire Bible. Now, there in verse 7, I think Paul calls us to self-examination. The word "purposeth," every man according as he purposeth in his heart, is a word I think we ought to pay really close attention to. It is a decision then, according to this word in the Greek, it is a decision that we make as to what we give to God. And that decision is based on how we have been blessed. Of course, we can go to chapter 16 of the book of 1 Corinthians. And there Paul talks about our giving as well. So by implication, the idea here of this word is to intend, or to make a plan, if you would. God doesn't want us to, basically, God doesn't want you coming in here on Sunday morning and rummaging through your purse trying to find a few dollar bills to give. Have you ever seen anyone do that? Not ready to give, and they're trying to figure out 5, 10, 20, what am I going to give? That's really not a good way. A good way of giving and trying to please God is to examine our circumstances, whatever it is in life that we are having to expend financially, and examine our income, what we're bringing in, and try to come to a good decision based on our circumstances. Give what's proper. Do what ought to be done. And if it's hard to be a cheerful giver if you don't purpose it. If you don't make a game plan and say, this is what I want to give to God, based on how God has blessed me and what I have to spend to live, if you're not doing it that way, it's really hard to be a cheerful giver. You come in here on a Sunday morning and you're stressing over a dollar bill, trying to figure out what to do. Dwight?
I think it's also fair to say, it says to give that you have prospered. You've been out of work, sick or whatnot for a little bit, and you haven't had an income, you haven't prospered. So it's not expected.
Yeah, let me go to 1 Corinthians 16. I agree with you. Upon the first day of the week, let every one of you lay by him in store, as God has prospered him, and that there be no gatherings when I come. Last week I made a statement about proper planning, and basically the same statement I've made tonight. And our giving to a congregation needs to be as steady as it can be, but I do, and there are reasons for that. So that when elders make plans, they can afford to fulfill their obligations. If I make an obligation of $20 a week and the elders make an obligation to support something or someone, and then I cut my 20, can they continue to support the thing that they promised? It's going to be impossible. So there are times when things change. When that happens, what should we do? Probably should let the elders know, especially if I'm a liberal giver. Dwight?
And that kind of connects up when you were saying that. I thought when we were applying for the loan, you remember when we built this building?
Yes.
That's one of the things the bank asked for. They wanted the budget. They wanted us to present a budget of our normal income and what our expenditures was. So.
It's good practice. It's scriptural. And it's good business sense, doesn't it? It makes good sense. So every man, according as he is purposed in his heart, so let him give, not grudgingly or of necessity, for God loveth a cheerful giver. So I talked about a cheerful giver just a moment ago. I made a statement on that. Now the Proverbs writer, Solomon, in Proverbs 11-25 says, the liberal soul shall be made fat. I do not believe that's a concept of you give 25, God will give you 50. That's not what he's saying in a spiritual sense. I believe Proverbs is speaking, and I think it can be true in a physical sense, but there is no promise of giving God a $100 bill and expecting God to give you 100 back. That's just not a concept in the Bible, as some say it is. So out of a full, open, and generous heart, we make a gift to God based on a true examination of our circumstances. And that's why I've always said, listen, I don't like counting money on Sunday morning. I try to stay away from that place on Sunday morning. Don't like to look at checks. I don't like to see what people give. Be honest with you, I don't want to be burdened with that. We've got a couple of 2 or 3 men that do that, and it's best for me not to know, because I'm afraid I might be the kind of person, I don't think I am, but I might be the kind of person, if I know Michelle gives a $5 bill and I think, well, I think Michelle can give 100. You know how we are as humans? Now, Michelle, I know this. I'm just using you as an example. I expect a $100 check come Sunday morning. No, I'm just teasing. Could we not be like that? Let's take care of our own business. Let us take care of our own business. Be happy to give as we've been prospered. Listen, here's how I determine I can be happy. If what my wife and I decide to give, if I think it's hurting me just a little bit, I'm starting to get just a little bit happy. And I'll tell you why. Think of the gift of God to humanity. How much burden was it to allow his son to go through what he went through?
Everything.
Think of that, folks. And then to give should be a cheerful thing for us to be able to give back to the church to help spread the word of God.
We know, a lot of times people who are working, sometimes they can make a little bit extra money, but people like myself who
It is different.
When they have, when they pray, you know, make their prayers, I feel like sometimes the people who, you know, like ourselves, who don't earn a living, you know, unpaid sick, are kind of left out, because, you understand what I'm saying?
Yeah, let me ask you this question, guys. Does it enhance the gift if my attitude is right? Doesn't it?
Yeah, well, it's all in the attitude.
It's all in attitude. Say that again.
It's all in your attitude, yes.
Okay. You know, attitude, not grudgingly, not of necessity, like, oh, God is going to beat me if I don't give this amount. God has given us so much liberality in this command. God is saying, you be honest with yourself. Are there going to be souls in danger? I'm talking about members of the body of Christ. Are there going to be souls in danger because of this giving? I think this is one issue where there's going to be a lot of Christians very surprised.
Tony, you know, there are people out there goes out and buys lunch or supper or whatever at a restaurant. They'll end up spending more than they'll give on Sunday morning at church. I ain't seen anybody here does that. I'm
Well,
saying that
I've done it.
right there probably does.
It's hard to take Melissa Hoss out and not. I mean, you take two people, and that's all I'm saying. It's expensive. David, I'm so glad
Yeah,
embarrassed
give me
myself.
a break after that one.
I do.
Giving is a personal thing. It's a personal decision. And again, we just read the scripture. We're to give, generously, and as we purpose, as we plan. It's not an afterthought. It's not, well, here's what I've got left over this week. I'll give this next week. I'll have to wait. No, we plan this. We purpose this. But I also believe it's wise for us to consider ourselves and not other people. You mentioned this, judging someone else. I think we have a tendency to, think the person sitting in front of me, behind me, next to me, or over there, or whatever, well, they make so much money, they ought to give such and such. Well, we don't know probably how much they make. It's kind of funny. I'll give you a personal thing. It was, well, I guess it's one of our family members a while back. Whenever, I don't know if it was Obama or one of them running, I guess it may have been Biden, I don't know. But anyway, he said, if you make under $400,000, you're not going to pay any more tax, yada, yada, yada. Which ended up not being true, of course. But anyway, a family member said, no, how bad's that going to hurt you? I said, I don't make it. No. I mean, but in their mind, you think someone else, they're loaded or they're rich or whatever.
What if you do know the finances of a family? Just say you do. But you don't know the emergency that they had this week. You don't know the extra car they had, bill for a car they had to have repaired. You don't know that. So I'm laying there in the living room last night. And I hear this sound. Whoop, whoop, whoop. Well, it's my refrigerator. And I keep thinking, it's been doing that for about 2 years, but last night it really cut a shine. And I told Melissa, I said, we're going on vacation, as you well know. I told her, I said, we're going to have to spend very carefully, because I think when we come home, we're going to have to buy us another refrigerator. And she just looked at me and said, every year. So it's always something, taking her money. Yeah, but you never know what someone's going through, do you? Honestly. It is personal. It is between me and God, you and God. But there's nothing wrong for a preacher, an elder, a teacher, to talk about these things, to remind us of the importance of being honest with ourselves. All right.
Well, the reason I brought up about Social Security is that we have to plan, like you said, we have to purpose in our heart what we need to.
Yeah, that fixed income is how we usually refer to that. That can be very taxing, especially when you have things happen. You don't have extra money that you can save and put away typically, do you? It usually takes every penny you got, so it can be hard. Let's read verses. Let's start at verse 8. And God is able to make all grace abound toward you. I believe that. God can be gracious toward me, but am I being gracious to God? Keep that in thought. That ye always having all sufficiency in all things may abound to every good work. You know, when I'm thinking about good works, giving money on the Lord's Day, giving extra money to extra causes, whatever they may be. When I'm thinking and I'm being tasked to do these things, I need to remind myself of how good God has been to me. But you mentioned that expensive meal. You know, people will go out and they'll spend $70, $80 for a meal and not think a thing about it. I've seen people do this type of thing, and on Sunday morning it groans them to let go of a dollar bill. There used to be a poster, and the poster said, "Are you robbing God?" And I used to, when I was a boy, it had the basket and the money, as if money was going around, the black basket was going around, and it had a man with a suit on. You could see his suit. All you saw was his arm, I think. And he had a dollar bill in his hand, and I thought the idea was that he was stealing that dollar out of that basket. Well, I told my mother I thought that was awful bad. She says, "That's not what he's doing, honey." She said, "Look at his hand." Well, he's wearing diamond rings and giving a dollar bill. What sense does that make? And that's, are we robbing God? If I can go out and have an expensive, if you go out, it's going to be expensive. If you go out and eat, you can afford to give to God, right? That's the point. If we're doing things, we can afford to give to God. Verse 9, as it is written, He hath dispersed abroad, He hath given to the poor, His righteousness remaineth forever. Now he that ministereth seed to the sower, both minister bread for your food, and multiply your seed sown, and increases the fruits of your righteousness. These verses say a lot. Let me read 11 too. Being enriched in everything to all bountifulness, which causeth through us thanksgiving to God. So God is able to abound, or to make all grace abound toward you. You know, God has the power. He has the ability, the disposition to please humanity. And He does it every day. He does it every day of our lives. He's able to give an overflowing measure of all the good gifts that we enjoy in life. You know, you think about God being good to you, when you take your next breath, you thank God. Because without God, you don't have air to breathe. Think about that. You think about the next moment you're standing on solid ground, because without Jesus Christ, what's the Bible say about Jesus in this world? Does He sustain all things? You know, without Jesus, we don't even have a world to stand on. God is able to supply with ample means to supply our needs at all times. He makes that statement. In addition, He gives enough so that we can also give to others around us. God blesses us in that way. You know, I think of the poorest people. Edith has passed away, but I'm going to tell you a story about Edith. Recently, I do some things for her, and it didn't bother me a bit. I was glad to do it. But the next time I saw her, $35, and she said, "If you don't take this, I don't want you back in my house." She said, "Take your wife and buy her something to eat." And so I did. You know, I blessed her, and she blessed me. God blessed us both, Chris.
Dad and I took a air conditioner for her and Connie over there one time. And, of course, she was wanting to pay for it, wanting to pass. "No, it's yours. You know, y'all need air conditioning. It's hot, it's hot." And she told us that she was going to figure up a value and account for that for her taxes. And I said, "Well, that's up to you, I guess, in your own heart." But she wouldn't take it just as a gift.
So think about this. In verse 10, he makes this statement: God is able to multiply our own seed. That's what I'm doing, what I'm giving. Whether it's monetarily or in other ways, God can multiply that. God then enriches us in verse 11. He makes it possible for us to do more and more because of our righteousness and our righteous use of what we have. And it doesn't always have to be money. I had a woman one time before I hadn't really studied, and I'm not saying I'm so great now, but at least I have a little better understanding. She's dying. She says, "Would you read the Bible to me?" And I did, but I didn't know what to read. Now, she was a Christian, but she was looking for words of comfort. I had no idea where to go. Not that I'm so smart, but at least now I have a little better understanding. If I'm faced with that, I can find a place that might give comfort to someone in that position of dying. God enriches us. He makes it possible then for us to do more with finances, with our minds, or whatever it may be, with any of the talents we have. So God through us is to be thanked, I think. Such actions that God takes that allows us to do more, that's really, it's blessing God when we do those things that we can do with what He's given us, and God is blessed as well. So you think about the condition of Jerusalem in this era. We're mid-50s AD. Listen, the saints in Jerusalem are lonely. They're desperate. They're poor. I think back to when the congregation there first started. What were they doing in chapter 2? I mean, they were all doing all these great things to help one another. What did we just read? I believe with all of my heart that they're blessing others in Acts chapter 2 and the first few chapters there is now going to be returned by the brethren in Macedonia and Achaia. These churches that are far away are going to be sending money back to this, I'll call it the seat of the religion of Christ. So, you know, these people are going through a lot and they need help, and I believe God's going to bless them because, and I believe so much, partly because they did what they were supposed to do when the time was right at the very beginning. So what about the value of giving? Is there a religious service side to it? Look at verse 12. For the administration of this service not only supplieth the want of the saints, but is abundant also by many thanksgiving unto God. Whilst by the experiment of this administration, they glorify God for your professed subjection unto the gospel of Christ, and for your liberal distribution unto them and unto all men. And by their prayer for you, which long after you for the exceeding grace of God in you, thanks be to God for His unspeakable gift. And so it will supply, our doing this supplies the need of saints. And He's telling them that what you're doing is going to supply the need that the saints in Judea had. It's going to help them with their sorrows. It's going to help relieve their distress. It's going to help relieve their hunger, their poverty in so many ways. And it will let them know that there are brethren in a faraway place called Achaia and a faraway place called Macedonia. There is someone somewhere that still cares about you, and they remember what you did for the church when it was first started. The same thing is true here. When I, on a personal level, am giving, and then those funds are taken by the elders, and we support a family that's lost a home or that's had a tragic accident or a disease or whatever it may be, and we're trying to help. We've committed ourselves, we've helped that individual. Down the road, they help someone else. I can remember in the school of preaching, the money that was given to me at the end of my 3 years, I had money left over in my account. That's my money. I can do what I want to with it. Why is it my money? Because churches gave it to me. But my reasoning was this: they gave it to me for a purpose. to sustain me while I was in school. Well, I'm no longer in school. I'm working at Valley, and the congregation there is taking care of me. So I wanted that money to be used, and I took the very money that was given to me in good faith, and I gave it and used it toward other students. And I think that's the idea that we ought to keep in mind. What we're doing is, it can come back to you. I wonder about those students, when they are going down the road in life and they think about how others help them, and when they now have a need or an opportunity to help others, will they do it? Well, they should. It'll bring abundant thanksgiving unto God. This gift will will also overflow or allow others to see the goodness of God. And if you're over here in Judea and you're a member of the church, this new religion that's 40 or 50 years old, and you're suffering, and now your Jewish neighbors or your idolatrous neighbors see that another congregation has sent this money, what are they going to think? Well, it's going to impress them, isn't it? So I think God is then going to be blessed. There's thanksgiving to God. It yields, besides, a rich harvest of thanksgiving in the name of God. Listen, it's going to bring glory to God, I think, is the bottom line there in verse 13. When your service to others is seen, God is going to get the glory, and that's the purpose of all that we do, is to glorify the name of our God. Verse 14, it will cause a like concern on their part for you. So as they join in prayer on your behalf, others, that is, their hearts will go out to you and be drawn to you. They will rather be concerned for your happiness as well. Just keep in your mind that there were some Jewish Christians, even up to this point, who looked upon Gentiles as they were still unclean. Now you've got those very Jewish people who are needing some help, and guess who's sending this money? The majority of it's coming from the Gentile population of the church in Macedonia and Achaia, or at least a great part of it. So Paul, I don't think, was very sure of how they would respond to the gift, but he hoped that it was going to be favorable. Verse 15, let's say a couple of things about that, and then we'll close this chapter. Paul was not only thankful to God for his salvation, but thankful for the salvation of the Gentiles and their ability to help the church. He was very thankful for what the gospel was doing in the lives of those men and women. It was cementing, if you would, or gluing together these two one-time very split groups of people, Jews and Gentiles. It's bringing them together in the one body, which was God's desire and God's plan. Most of all, Paul was thankful for God and for Jesus. For it was God's gift of his son, Jesus, that made everything that he was doing, including the collection for the saints, it made it all possible. God's gift is an unspeakable gift. It's beyond my imagination. And so when I think of others needing me to give a gift, I am behooved to do that. I am encouraged to do it because of what God has done for me. So, any comments? Okay, so thankfulness for God's gift is the end of this chapter in my mind. But as we read through and we think about everything that's happened, I want you to think about God's unspeakable gift and his kindness to you through his son. You know, the greatest thing in the universe, I guess you could say, is the mind. The greatest thing in the mind is our love to God. The greatest element of our love to God and others is the good deeds we do for God and for others. And so all of this works together. So let's open our books. If you have one, I've got just enough time to go through most of these questions, and I'm not going to tarry very long on them. If you have the answer, speak up. What effect did the zeal of the brethren of Achaia have on others? Well, it provoked many. The Bible says it provoked many. In other words, their zeal, their desire to do the right thing, caused others to want to do it. And listen, when you're doing that, when you're giving and providing other services, whatever they may be, when you're living that Christian life, someone is watching you and they're being encouraged by you or they're being discouraged by you, depending on where you're at and what you're doing. Number two, why had Paul sent the brethren? Well, that is boasting in Achaia be not in vain. So we're talking about being sent and to collect. Number three, to what does in this behalf refer to in verse 3? Well, let me go back up to verse 3. Yet I have sent the brethren, lest our boasting be or should be of you should be in vain in this behalf. Well, in this behalf here refers to in this effort of raising these funds. That's what he's talking about.
Respect.
Okay. In respect of this. Okay. Number 4, what could cause Paul to be ashamed of his boasting about the Corinthians? Well, what could cause him to be ashamed is if when it came time to receive that money to take it to Jerusalem, the brethren of Corinth weren't ready. So be ready. Number 5, what is the principle about sowing and reaping found in this chapter? Well, from verse 6, it is the principle of sowing sparingly. You reap sparingly, you sow bountifully, you reap bountifully. That's the principle here. Number 6, before a person gives anything to the Lord's work, he should have purpose. Huh?
Love and purpose.
Yes, purpose. Purpose in his heart. That is to do with the quality. That has to do with the quality of giving again. It's not the amount, but it's the quality that you give of the gift. Number 7, to give grudgingly or of necessity prevents one from being a cheerful giver. This is a thought question. I'm just going to read over it. Is it likely that many of the good people in the Lord's kingdom will be lost because they do not give enough? Let me answer my answer, and you may have yours. I think, yes, it's very possible. It's very possible that a lot of people are going to be lost because they do not give as they should. I can't tell you that. That's between you and God. So you know, it behooves you to really think about the blessing that God has given you in your life. Should we resent it if the preacher or elders mention this frequently? Please don't resent it. It's not, preachers aren't begging you for money. That's not what it is. We just want to make sure that, as we do in all areas, that you're doing things correctly. You know, I preach on baptism. I don't know, a lot. There last year I preached a sermon on, is my baptism valid? Well, that's a silly sermon, wasn't it? No. Because even Christians need to be reminded to examine their baptism to make sure it's right, just like we do giving, David.
I can't speak of other congregations, but for here, we probably don't speak on it enough.
Probably not.
I don't remember the last time I spoke on giving, but it is a command for
3
all.
years ago I spoke on it. It's not, that's pretty rare, isn't it? It is a command. It'd be a good sermon for
Somebody.
For somebody. All right. It's going to say for this Sunday night, but she won't be here.
You're not in. That's the reason I said for somebody.
Yeah. All right. Suggest some things to consider while that would make giving less painful to the giver. And I think it's right in this chapter. It's reminding ourselves of how God has blessed us. Don't forget that. And listen, it's not my business what you give. It's God. It's your and God's business. You're the one God's blessed. So it's your business with God. Number 9, Christians need to increase the blank of their righteousness. Fruits. Fruits. You know, we ought to ever be increasing. Fruits of righteousness. Number 10. This is from verse 10, by the way. God supplies blank for the sword and bread, and blank for food.
Seed first.
Seed, bread, and then he will blank the seed sown. He'll multiply. You know, God will do these things. God. Who gives me the ability to have money? God. What will God do? He'll take care of me when I'm giving that money to others. God's going to take care of it. I think that's the thing behind it all. Number 11. Paul said the administration of this service not only supplieth the want of the saints, but is abundant also by many thanksgiving unto God. And then number 12. What two things did they glorify God by the experiment of this administration? Well, number 1, subjection unto the gospel of Christ, that is obedience to God and will and to his commands, and the liberal distribution unto all men. I love the idea when we as Christians have the ability to come together and help others who truly need the help. And then 13, find the verses which contain the following words. Well, liberal distribution is verse 13, if you didn't get it. Bountifully is verse 6. Purposeth was in verse 7, and cheerful was in verse 7. Bountifulness is verse 11, and bounty verse 5. Sufficiency was in verse 8. Next question. With what subject to the above words, deal with a whole? What do these words deal with as a whole? Liberal distribution, bountifully, purpose, cheerful, bountifulness, bounty, sufficient. They deal with our giving, how we give to God, and the quality of our giving, I guess. Number 15, he asks, Paul boasted about Achaea's work to Macedonia. So where are these places on the map? Well, we don't have a map to look at right now. I don't know if you looked it up or not. And he asks, are they cities? And he asks, which appears to be the larger? Well, this region is between modern-day Italy and the Asian continent, just north of Greece. They were not necessarily cities, they were larger, they were regions. The Achaean region and the Macedonian regions. And if you look at the map, clearly the Achaean region is smaller by half than the other. But here's this small region that's doing such a great work in giving and helping others. True and false questions, and we'll be done. True or false? The main thing to be concerned about in our giving is the need for the gift. Well, that's false, isn't it? Yeah, that's false. This chapter teaches that to sow sparingly is to reap sparingly. That's true. True or false? The spirit of giving is not so important so long as one gives the right amount. That's false. It's not the amount. It's not the amount. I can give 20 and you can give 5 and you can be giving a lot more than me. It just depends on how God's blessed you. Isn't it? Number 4, Paul taught that giving to please God requires definite planning. True. It is true. Purpose it in your heart. Number 5, Paul boasted to Achaia that Macedonia was ready a year ago. That's false. That's the other way around. He boasted to Macedonia that Achaia was ready. Number 6, the chapter deals with ministering to saints. That's true. True or false? In this chapter, Paul called the ability to speak in tongues an unsearchable gift. No, he didn't. Not in this chapter. The word bounty has some kindred words in this chapter, and that's true. Bounty, bountiful, bountifulness, all of those words go together. Number 9, Paul said, God loveth a big giver.
False.
No, I said that. You know, it's my birthday, December the 9th, and it's not too early to remind you of it. Be a big giver on that day. Could be. All right, number 10. He hath dispersed abroad refers to the work that Paul did. No, it's the work that the region of Achaia and is doing and what Corinth is expected to do. Any questions? All right. Next week, chapter 10.